America's cold case crisis. How many murders go unsolved, and why? Imagine 10 families gathered in a room. Each family has lost someone to murder. Based on recent national clearance figures, the killers in approximately 4 of those cases may not be identified or brought before the justice system. Now multiply that room by thousands. Year after year, new unsolved murders are added to a national backlog already containing hundreds of thousands of cases. Every number represents a person. Every percentage represents families waiting for a telephone call that may never come. And every unsolved murder may leave a dangerous offender free to harm someone else. In 1965, approximately 80% of American homicides were cleared. By 2017, that figure had fallen to roughly 60%. The most recent complete national estimate suggests that approximately 61% of murders were cleared in 2024, an improvement over the previous few years, but still leaving thousands of newly reported killings unresolved. Why have homicide clearance rates declined? What does it actually mean when police say a case has been cleared? When does an unsolved murder become a cold case? And what are the realistic chances that a decades-old homicide will ever be solved? I'm Alan Key, a former major crimes detective and current polygraph examiner and author, and this is Cold Cases with Alan Key. Today, we are stepping away from one individual case to examine the numbers behind America's cold case crisis. But as we discuss statistics, remember this. Cold cases are not simply old files stored in boxes. They represent victims whose stories remain unfinished. Part 1. What is a cold case? The term cold case does not have one universally applied definition. Some agencies consider a homicide cold when it has remained unsolved for a particular number of years. Others use the term when investigators have exhausted all reasonable or productive leads. The National Institute of Justice previously described a cold case as one in which the available probative investigative leads have been exhausted, meaning a case can become cold after months rather than years. In 2019, the National Institute of Justice reported that its Cold Case Investigation Working Group adopted the following definition for its best practice recommendations. A case that has remained unsolved for at least 3 years and has the potential to be solved through newly acquired information or advanced evidence analysis technologies. However, the word cold can be misleading. It can sound as though investigators no longer care, or the case has been abandoned. That is not necessarily true. A case may remain open indefinitely, even when no detective is working on it every day. Evidence may still be preserved. Names may remain in databases. Fingerprints and DNA may continue to be compared with newly added records. A case can become active again when new information arrives, technology improves, or a previously unavailable witness agrees to talk. For this episode, I will use the term cold case to mean an unsolved homicide in which the original active investigation has slowed because the available leads did not identify a prosecutable suspect. That brings us to another important term: clearance. Part 2. What does cleared mean? Many people assume that a cleared homicide means someone was arrested, prosecuted, and convicted. That is not always the case. Under the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting System, a crime may generally be cleared in one of 2 ways. The first is clearance by arrest. That normally means police arrested at least one person, charged that person with the offense, and turned the case over for prosecution. The second is clearance by exceptional means. An exceptional clearance may be recorded when investigators have identified the offender, have enough evidence to support an arrest, and know the person's location, but some circumstance outside law enforcement's control prevents the arrest or prosecution. For example, the suspect may have died. A prosecutor may be unable to proceed because an essential witness has died. The offender may already be imprisoned in another jurisdiction, and extradition may not be possible. There are strict requirements before an agency can properly claim an exceptional clearance. The FBI's national crime data counts offenses cleared either by arrest or exceptional means. Therefore, a clearance rate is not exactly the same as a conviction rate. A case may be cleared without anyone being convicted. A person may be arrested and later acquitted. Charges may be dismissed. A suspect may die before trial. Clearance measures police case resolution, not the final outcome of every prosecution. There is also another complication. A murder cleared during a particular year may have occurred years earlier. If a police department reported 100 murders in 1 year and cleared 60 cases during that same year, some of those clearances might involve older homicides. Therefore, annual clearance rates are useful for identifying broad trends, but they do not always tell us what percentage of that year's murders were solved within that same year. Statistics require context. Part 3. How many murders are unsolved? There is no single perfect count of every unsolved murder in America, but the number is alarming. Different estimates begin with different years, include different agencies, and handle missing data differently. A National Institute of Justice report published in 2020 estimated that approximately 250,000 unresolved homicides existed in the United States at that time. The report estimated that more than 100,000 of those cases had accumulated during the previous 20 years. A separate analysis cited in academic research estimated that approximately 331,000 homicides reported between 1965 and 2020 remained unsolved. Project Cold Case, which analyzes FBI uniform crime reporting data, estimates that the cumulative number has continued growing and now exceeds 350,000 unresolved homicides when a longer historical period is considered. These estimates are not identical because they use different starting dates and calculation methods. The safest conclusion is not that one exact number is unquestionably correct. The safest conclusion is that America has accumulated hundreds of thousands of unresolved homicides. Consider what that means. The FBI estimates that about 6,000 homicides are added to the cold case files every year. An unresolved homicide is not always a mysterious stranger murder from 50 years ago. Some are relatively recent cases. Some involve a known suspect whom prosecutors cannot yet charge. Some involve missing people whose remains have never been found. Think Jimmy Hoffa. Some involve unidentified victims. Others contain biological evidence but no matching DNA profile. A case may have a strong theory but insufficient admissible evidence. Another case may have almost nothing beyond the victim's body and the location where it was discovered. Cold cases are not all equally solvable. Part 4. The declining clearance rate. The long-term change in homicide clearance rates is concerning. In the mid-1960s and 1970s, American police agencies reported clearing close to 80% of murders. By 2005, the national figure was approximately 62%. In 2016, it was around 59%. By 2021 and 2022, some estimates place the national clearance rate near historic lows, slightly above 50%. Project Cold Case's analysis of FBI data estimates the following recent rates. In 2020, approximately 51%. In 2021, approximately 51%. In 2022, approximately 54%. In 2023, approximately 58%. And in 2024, approximately 61%. That recent improvement is encouraging. The FBI also reported that the estimated number of murders and non-negligent manslaughters declined by 14.9% in 2024 compared with 2023. Fewer murders, combined with more successful investigations, could reduce the number of new cold cases added each year. But even a 61% clearance rate means that approximately 39% are not cleared during the statistical reporting period. Project Cold Case estimates that there were approximately 16,135 homicides in 2024 and roughly 6,280 uncleared cases based on its analysis. That is more than 6,000 families beginning a journey of uncertainty in a single year. And those cases are added to the enormous unresolved inventory from previous decades. Part 5. Why were more murders cleared decades ago? At first, the declining clearance rate may seem difficult to understand. Modern investigators have DNA, surveillance cameras, cell phone records, license plate readers, computerized databases, and social media evidence. Detectives in the 1960s had none of those tools. So why were clearance rates often higher? One reason is that the nature of homicide has changed. Historically, a larger proportion of killings involved relatives, spouses, or acquaintances. When the victim and offender know each other, investigators usually have a smaller suspect pool. There may be an established conflict, domestic violence history, or witnesses who can identify the relationship. Today, many difficult homicides involve firearms, gangs, drug markets, or offenders with limited connections to the victim. A person may be shot from a passing vehicle. The offender may wear a mask. The weapon may never be found. Witnesses may see the shooting but be unable or unwilling to identify the killer. Another factor is community cooperation. Witnesses may fear retaliation. They may distrust law enforcement. They may believe speaking to police will place their families at risk. A detective can strongly suspect who committed a murder but still be unable to prove it without witnesses or physical evidence. Staffing also matters. A homicide investigation requires time. Detectives must conduct interviews, examine digital records, review video, prepare warrants, coordinate laboratory testing, and follow leads that may cross state lines. When an agency experiences several murders in a short period, investigators may be forced to divide their attention. New cases arrive while older cases remain unfinished. Large agencies may have specialized homicide units, crime analysts, and full-time forensic personnel. A small, rural department may have only a few investigators handling every major crime. Even sophisticated technology creates additional work. A modern homicide may involve hundreds of hours of surveillance footage, thousands of text messages, and enormous quantities of cell phone location information. Technology can reveal the answer, but someone must collect, organize, and interpret the data. Part 6. Which cases are hardest to solve? Certain homicide circumstances tend to make a case more difficult. Stranger murders are generally harder because investigators cannot begin with an obvious relationship. Cases without witnesses are harder. Cases in which the body is found long after death may lose valuable biological and trace evidence. Cases involving victims found far from the primary crime scene create additional challenges. The body may have been transported across several jurisdictions. Investigators may not know where the victim was attacked or killed. Unidentified victims present another obstacle. Until investigators know who the victim was, they cannot fully examine relationships, routines, employment, or recent conflicts. No-body homicide cases can also be challenging. A murder can be prosecuted without recovering a body, but investigators must prove that the missing person is dead and that the death resulted from criminal conduct. Cases involving marginalized victims may receive less immediate public attention, fewer tips, or fewer investigative resources. People involved in high-risk lifestyles may also have large, constantly changing social networks that are difficult to reconstruct. None of this means a victim caused the crime or deserves less effort. It simply means investigators may face additional barriers in determining the final movements and relationships surrounding the victim. The first 24 to 48 hours are critical in many homicide investigations. Witness memories are fresh. Surveillance footage may still exist. Vehicles have not yet been cleaned or repaired. Suspects have had less time to coordinate stories. When a body is not discovered for weeks, months, or years, many of those opportunities are already gone. Part 7. Why do cold cases stay cold? The most common reason a cold case remains unsolved is not necessarily that investigators failed to identify any possible suspect. Sometimes police know who probably committed the crime, but cannot prove it. Suspicion and proof are not the same thing. An investigator may have motive, opportunity, and inconsistent statements, but without reliable witnesses, physical evidence, or a confession containing verifiable details, prosecutors may determine that the case cannot be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Other cases remain cold because evidence was lost, destroyed, or never collected. Before DNA testing existed, investigators did not always preserve biological evidence in ways suitable for testing decades later. Items may have been stored in heat, moisture, or improper packaging. Some evidence was consumed during early testing. Other evidence disappeared when agencies moved buildings or changed record systems. Witnesses also die. Memories fade. Suspects move. Vehicles are destroyed. Buildings are demolished. Records that were once kept on paper may be missing or incomplete. Cold case investigators are often trying to reconstruct an event after the original physical world surrounding the crime has disappeared. Resources are another major factor. The National Institute of Justice has noted that cold case work is underserved, partly because many agencies lack sufficient personnel, funding, and laboratory resources. Its Best Practices Working Group recommended dedicated cold case units, experienced investigators, regular reviews of unsolved cases, and ready access to forensic technology. Without dedicated personnel, an old case may be reviewed only when a new tip arrives. Part 8. What is the solve rate for reopened cold cases? This is a difficult question because agencies use different definitions and track outcomes differently. A national study of cold case practices found that only about 20% of the agencies surveyed had a formal protocol for initiating cold case investigations. The study estimated that approximately 1 in 5 cases selected for cold case investigation was cleared, but only about 1 in 100 reviewed cold cases resulted in a conviction. That difference is important. A case may be cleared because the offender is identified, but deceased. Investigators may establish what happened without having enough admissible evidence for trial. A suspect may confess, but die before charges are filed. In other cases, prosecutors may be unable to proceed because witnesses or necessary evidence are gone. The 1 in 100 conviction figure should not be interpreted as meaning every cold case unit solves only 1% of its cases. It came from a particular national study involving agency surveys and selected case reviews. Results vary dramatically depending on which cases are chosen, whether testable evidence exists, and whether a dedicated unit has adequate funding. Some focused units achieve much better results. A Michigan multi-jurisdictional cold case team reported solving 19 homicides over 9 years. Cold case success improves when investigators carefully prioritize cases rather than simply opening the oldest file. The best candidates often contain preserved biological evidence, an identifiable suspect, a living witness, or new information that can be independently verified. Part 9. How modern science solves old cases. DNA has transformed cold case investigation. Older samples that once produced no result may now yield usable profiles. Modern laboratories can sometimes analyze aged, degraded, or extremely small biological samples. Evidence that produced an inconclusive result 20 years ago may now identify a suspect. The Combined DNA Index System,
commonly known as CODIS, allows qualifying crime scene profiles to be compared with profiles collected from convicted offenders, qualifying arrestees, and evidence from other crimes. A match may identify a suspect or connect crimes committed in different states. But CODIS cannot identify someone whose DNA has never entered the database. That is where forensic genetic genealogy can become important. Investigators may compare a suitable DNA profile with participating genealogy databases, identify distant relatives, and construct family trees. Traditional investigation is then used to narrow the family to individuals who fit the victim's location, age, and circumstances. Genetic genealogy has identified murder suspects and previously unidentified victims in cases that were cold for decades. But it is not available in every case. The sample must contain sufficient DNA. The profile must be suitable for the process. Investigators must follow applicable laws, database policies, and privacy restrictions. Fingerprints can also produce new results when old prints are rescanned and compared against larger databases. Ballistic evidence may connect firearms used in different crimes. Digital restoration may improve old photographs, recordings, or surveillance images. Geographic information systems can compare crime locations. Modern software can search thousands of names, addresses, and reports for connections that detectives working with paper files could easily miss. Technology does not replace investigators. It gives them new ways to ask old evidence new questions. Part 10. The importance of reviewing the original investigation. A proper cold case review begins at the beginning. Investigators should not simply accept the original theory. They must examine the entire file with fresh eyes. Who was the victim? What was the confirmed timeline? Which witnesses were interviewed? Which people were never located? Which alibis were independently verified? Was someone eliminated for a reason that would no longer be considered sufficient? Did investigators focus too quickly on one suspect? Were reports filed under different names or jurisdictions? Evidence should be inventoried. Does every item listed in the original report still exist? Was it stored correctly? Can it be tested? Should it be tested now or preserved for a more advanced method? Old witnesses should be contacted again when appropriate. A person who was frightened at age 20 may be willing to talk at age 60. A former spouse may no longer feel obligated to protect someone. A witness may now understand that something heard in childhood was actually a confession. But investigators must also recognize memory limitations. A confident memory after 40 years is not automatically an accurate one. Statements must be compared with physical evidence and records created closer to the crime.
Part 11. A detective's perspective. From a detective's perspective, statistics can be useful, but they can also hide the reality of investigative work. A 60% clearance rate does not mean investigators worked hard on 60 cases and ignored 40. Some murders are solved within hours because the offender remains at the scene. Other cases require years of interviews, surveillance, and laboratory testing. One strong witness can solve a case. One frightened witness can prevent it from being solved. One properly preserved DNA sample can identify a killer decades later. One contaminated crime scene can create questions that never disappear. The most important factor is often not a dramatic piece of forensic evidence. It is the combination of small details: a telephone record, a vehicle description, a receipt, a changed statement, a fiber, a witness who remembers someone returning home at an unusual hour. Each fact may appear weak alone. Together, they may create proof. Cold case detectives also need humility. They must be willing to admit that the original theory was wrong. They must separate evidence from rumor. They must avoid accusing someone simply because that person appears suspicious. And they must remember that identifying a suspect is only part of the job. The case must be presented in a form that a prosecutor can take into court and prove beyond a reasonable doubt.
Part 12. Why solving cold cases matters. Some people ask why police should spend limited resources investigating a murder committed 30 or 40 years ago. The answer begins with the victim. The passage of time does not reduce the value of a human life. Families do not stop wanting answers because a file becomes old. An unresolved murder can affect several generations. Parents die without knowing what happened to a child. Children grow up without knowing who killed a parent. Communities continue living with uncertainty. There is also a public safety reason. An offender responsible for one unsolved murder may have committed others. The National Institute of Justice has warned that cold case offenders are sometimes linked to multiple crimes. Solving one old case may reveal a serial offender, connect evidence from several jurisdictions, or prevent future violence. Cold case investigations can also expose wrongful assumptions. DNA may identify the actual killer. It may eliminate someone who lived under suspicion for decades. The truth matters both for victims and for people wrongly accused. Finally, solving an old case sends a message. The justice system does not forget simply because the offender managed to avoid arrest during the first investigation. Closing. America has accumulated hundreds of thousands of unresolved homicides. Recent homicide clearance rates have improved, but thousands of murders still go uncleared each year. Some will be solved within months. Others will wait for a DNA match, a new witness, or technology that has not yet been invented. And some may never be solved. But difficult does not mean hopeless. Evidence preserved decades ago is identifying offenders today. Family trees are restoring names to unidentified victims. Old witnesses are finally speaking. Dedicated investigators are reopening files that once appeared impossible. Behind every statistic is a person. Behind every unsolved case is a family living without a complete answer. And behind some of those cases is an offender who believed that the passage of time guaranteed safety. It does not. Anyone with information about an unsolved homicide should provide that information directly to the investigating agency. Do not assume someone else has already reported it. Do not confront a suspected offender. Do not post accusations online. A small, accurate detail may be the piece investigators have been missing. I'm Alan Key, and this has been Cold Cases with Alan Key. For more respectful, evidence-based examinations of unsolved crimes, subscribe to this podcast and share this episode. You can also find my book, Cold Cases, The Most Infamous Unsolved Murders and the Science That Could Solve Them Today, available through Amazon. Until next time, remember, every number represents a victim. Every unsolved case represents unfinished work. And no matter how many years have passed, the truth still matters.